welcome to the course, Lecture 2, and we are continuing on the debate of place from the Lecture 1, and this Lecture 2 covers on place and identity. So, as just discussed in the Lecture 1, we just stopped at this slide of which we talked about how the debate on the place and space and understanding the place is a very useful concept for the built environment studies because it provides an alternative position that separates the mind from the body and instead enables a discussion of the relationships between the mind and the external world through the body. So how, as I said to you earlier, how a man it's a body who travels to London, to Paris. So he's traveling all over the world, or different places, but then it's just the body which is traveling, but his mind which is actually interacting with the external world. So it could be a body is a kind of vehicle which is taking you to a different places, but whereas it's your mind which is interpreting different cultures. Now, I'll tell you a few examples for a simple understanding. So what you see here is two goddesses. I'll tell you a story of my own mother. I was working in Bhopal for 5 years in School of Planning and Architecture Bhopal, and my mother and my father have visited me in Bhopal, which is in the central part of India, and my ethnic origin, I come from South India, which is from Andhra Pradesh. So all her life, for about 55 years, she have worshipped Durga goddess, and she have a practice of waking up in the morning 5:36 and going to a temple, and the evening 7 o'clock, 6 o'clock, she go to the Durga goddess temple, and she spend all her time and in praying a goddess. So now, when she was invited to stay with me, she was feeling little discomfort. I've asked my mother, why are you feeling so discomfort? She said, I used to visit a temple every day, but now here I'm not finding a temple. So now I have found a nearby temple in the locality, and I've introduced to another Durga temple somewhere in the locality. Now, I thought she will be happy, but then she's still not happy. Of course, I tried to soothe her feelings, but the thing is, she's not completely happy. Then I asked one day, why are you not so happy? She said, here, in many of the Durga temples I have visited, here both the goddess Durga and the god Krishna, both of them are made with marble, and they both will be smiling. But whereas in the south, we have the Durga is bound to be furious. She is more furious and different kind of attires which we decorate, and it's mostly it is reflected in a furious way. So she have imagined that Durga everywhere, and now she expected that the same South Indian goddess of Bhavani or Mahalakshmi in Kanakadurga in the place of the North Indian temple. So this is where people are attached with what they see and what they are habituated and what they developed a belief system in it. So even a color of a goddess, even the fabric used, even the setting of the goddess has made a deeper impact in one's lives. So one has to understand that these practices are actually gets enmeshed within ourselves. What we do, we refer to a kind of habitualities. Now, being a South Indian, I normally eat food with hand, whereas in some other cultures they eat with forks, and then the other cultures they eat with spoon or fork, right? So different kinds of ways of eating, different kinds of practices each of us have. Now, I would like to refer to one of the famous contribution, which is by the Poetics of Space, written by Gaston Bachelard. So here he refers with a person's geographer, Yi-Fu Tuan's, which is a term topophilia. Yi-Fu Tuan coins a term called topophilia in the Poetics of Space, that the life of the mind is given form in the places and spaces in which people dwell, and those places influence human memories, feelings, and thoughts. So, we are coming from how a place is taking back from the essence of the human memories, feelings, and thoughts. So, my mother, her association with a worship, with a deity, which has supposed to be furious, so even that particular regular practice of going to a temple becomes her habitual practice, and for her it has become a memory, for her it has a practice, and then she developed a feeling towards it, she developed a belief system to it. So that is how people they continue their practices. Now, when we talk about the topophilia, topophilia is it is an affective response to a place, but it is also a practice that can actively produce places for people. A practice that can actively produce places for people. For instance, I'll give you a few examples from the African continent. Now, what you see on the right hand side is a Maasai compound. A Maasai tribes in near Kenya, Africa. So here they are mostly on a kind of very indigenous tribes. So what you see is a partitions here, and a part of it is mentioned for sheep, part of it is mentioned for cows, part of it is mentioned for cattle. And here in the African cultures, they have these tribal settlements. They are both monogamous and the polygamous. In the next slide, we'll be discussing about how the settlements do vary and how their organization of places do vary. Now, here in the polygamous culture, obviously they have a head person. They have basically two entrances to their habitats. And then, for instance, they have a head family, and then he have some wives who have probably one or two wives. So probably they have these wives, and then they have their goats, cattle. So they're all interlinked, and at the same time they have these kind of fences, which so they're all, because being a polygamous tribe, they tend to develop certain practices. And in the African, in these kind of practices, a man, he doesn't get a significant house, but he's also have number of wives, and he keeps changing his position. So whichever wife he's staying, so he keeps changing his position, and he is all, and the woman is also involved in the domestic works of making a house, making their taking the cattle out. And so here, in all these societies, in these tribal societies, the very fundamental difference of today's societies and in those societies, here everyone knows everything. So it is not only a carpenter knows how to build a house. It's not a mason know how to make a brickwork or anything. So whatever the dwelling they are manifesting, so it is, they know all the skills as a community. They learn with each other. They have set up a practice. And with these living practices, which because of their indigenous polygamous cultures, it has given up certain practices of living, how husbands keep transferring his position, and at the same time how this herding of cattle, and how they have dedicated certain space, right, and how their living, it has defined their living practices. Similarly, Amos Rappaport is one of the important person who actually developed an important contribution, house, farm, and culture. So it's around 1969. This is one of the significant contribution which is very much useful by the architects and the built environment professions. He actually talks about because until that point, these domestic buildings and the rural architecture, they're all completely ignored. So only this was the time Rappaport brought a new dimension of understanding culture before understanding their built environments. So he emphasizes on how we need to understand their culture and their roots and before understanding any of their built environments. So he differentiates with Cameroon's layout, the organization structures of a monogamous and a polygamous. So here, if you see, there is a wife and children, there's a head of the family, here is an entry, and he have the calf, he have the storage, and he has a dedicated place for grandmother and a dedicated place for a kitchen. So obviously there's a fencing towards it. So this is a kind of very simple structure of monogamous structure. Whereas in the polygamous structure, where you have the entry here, a little shed, and they position the kind of granaries and the court in the center, and here the head of the family with his goats and his principal wife, probably the main wife or then his wives, the second wife, third wife, and then their kitchens, right? And then the goats, place for goats and the sheep. So in fact, this whole thing becomes a kind of a homogeneous setting for a polygamous family. So they work with each other, they live with each other, they live very they cooperate with each other in everything, and each member of the family have acquires all kind of skills in making the compound walls, in making their the houses with the cow dung and the wattle and daub constructions. They know how to do set up with their granaries, so they know how to go for heading. So each one of them are cooperating with each other, and that is how these societies are. Now, when we take into another tribe, what you see here is the picture. It's called Dogon tribe. In the Dogon tribe, which is about a few kilometers from Mali, in Western Africa, Nigeria, and here this is this is located in the Bandiagara and Downtown districts of Mali, and mostly about 300,000. And they all stretch along about 200 kilometers stretch of escarpment called the cliffs of Bandiagara. So there was a cliffs, and then on the just downside the cliffs on the topographic side, all these kind of tribal hamlets are there. Now, among the Dogon and Bambara of Mali, every object and a social event has a symbolic as well as utilitarian function. So for instance, you see here the kind of house, the dwelling types, the kind of they're all domestically produced and domestically consumed. And here I want to tell you a story of this particular tribe. There used to be two anthropologists from the Western anthropologists. They lived with this tribe for about 15 years. And after living for 15 years, with a close observation in this tribal activities and how they are performing their rituals, how they are performing their daily activities, finally the head of these tribes have brought them into the confidence, and they shared some of their indigenous understanding of their spiritual understanding of the universe and their cosmic behaviors. So in fact, they also referred with some certain stars, which is now referred a kind of they are referred with certain stars which are few light years they were existing, and they are also calculating, and they are also talking about existing of other stars and their movements and their patterns. So at that point of time, it appeared to be a little superstitious or maybe not believable. But later on, when they published this whole information of their understanding of this cosmic understanding, and later on, some of the astrophysics people, they also have looked into the indigenous understandings, and they verified whether it is true or not. And later, a few years later, the scientists do clarified that what the Dogon tribe have talked about, the shining Milky Way and all the stars, Sirius, everything, they were accepted by the scientific community. So which means there is a law which indicates that there is a lot of indigenous knowledge inbuilt within the communities. So it is beyond our thinking, beyond our. So for us, we as an educated people look at the tribe as an uneducated, but look at the way they are having a knowledge about the planets and the stars and the patterns. So similarly, there are some of the seals which you can see, they also follow a certain pattern of which have a dualistic nature. And the form plots and the whole landscape of Dogon reflect this cosmic order. So they follow a kind of their villages are built in pairs to represent heaven and earth, and the fields are cleared in spirals because the world has been created spirally. So they have their understanding, taking the inspiration of those cosmic forms and into their habitats. And not only that, you can see here, these villages are laid out in the way parts of the body lie with respect to each other, while the house of Dogon or the chief is a model of the universe at a smaller scale. So sometimes the multi-storied houses are the prerogative of the highest religious and political leaders and are the symbols of power. Obviously, there's a multi-storied houses which is slightly dominant by scale, by its character, and it symbolizes the power and representation of them being used for many purposes. For example, a mask to frighten away the souls of the dead. What you see here is a kind of masks which a person wears, and the belief system is that they try to frighten, frighten away the souls of the dead, or sometimes it also because there's lions, the African lions, and also the wild animals. So in other way, this has become a kind of, though it is a representative future, but it is also have a purpose. It has a meaning into it, and the kind of colors which are indigenously developed. Now, coming to the sense of place, which we are talking about producing the meanings, how people produce, actively engage, and how produce meanings to their lives. Now, it is also a part of our cultural interpretation of the world around us. This is what Rose talks about. But Rose also mentions, apart from her three concepts, she also mentions about the politics of identity in defining oneself in opposition to another. So, one of the classic example in Indian continent, you can see about the Babri Masjid. So now, when you are talking about who built this, whether Rama was born or not, so this has created the question of identity, whether it is an Islamic, whether it is a place for the mythological birthplace of Rama, or so this has become a debate. So whereas the Hindus, they follow the kind of solar calendar, and the Islamic follows the kind of lunar processes. So we are trying to oppose with each other in order to create a kind of in order to define ourselves. So not only this, we in this whole process of how we are defining ourselves by creating by opposing the another particular element or a particular society or their belief system. So this is how a sense of belonging is also created. Now, when we say, now I showed you a small impression of a Babri Masjid at a monumental scale, but it is also happens much more in a city level. You heard about the cities in conflict. There's about 8 cities of conflict: Nicosia, Beirut, Berlin, Belfast, Jerusalem, and all these, which are in a conflict situation. Now, I'll myself, having been part of RehabMed project in south part of Cyprus, and having lived in north part of Cyprus, which we today we call it as Turkish Republic of North Cyprus, and you can see this was a walled city. You can see the walls here, and this is all the walled city. But now this is originally of the Greek civilization, which has spread over from, because they're all the Greek part of these cities. But from following the Ottoman period, now the Ottomans have already ruled this part of certain periods, and then gradually the Turkish customs and systems have occupied these places. And then in around 1980s, there was a huge war between the Turkey and the Greece, and there's still dispute still unresolved, and that is how they made a border of a border of dividing the city in between. So this border, it is a city of conflict, but now in the present situation, this is a kind of belongs to kind of European Union, but this is not recognized so far in a fully official way. But still, the Turkey supports his funding, and all the welfare is taken off by the Turkey. Now, what here, one of the important things, this particular central part is actually taken by the United Nations, the buffer zone, which we today you see a little buffer zone of the walled city. And why is this barriers created? Because the history, there is the history which is talking about bringing these differences and their practices and their belief systems and the power notions of their power notions. So this all creating the barriers. So now the question which then arises is how exactly is that people's identities are tied to places? What are the mechanisms through which this attachment is realized? So this is one of the fundamental questions of when we talked about politics of identity, we talked about the belief systems, we talked about the livelihood practices, we talked about the family structures, but then how exactly how one can understand. So this is where I want to bring the Martin Heidegger, one of his contribution of Being in Time. He talks about who we are, what is our mind, our ego is influenced by our relationship through our bodies to the outside world. When the Mughals came in, they came along the way from the Afghanistan, the Babur, and then they brought certain intentions. They brought certain of their impressions, what they had earlier, to the Indian subcontinent. And in time, things have changed in India too. Similarly, when the colonials, starting from Portuguese, the Dutch, and the Danish, and the British, when they traveled to India, obviously their impressions were carried. Their notions of as a kind of how the places should be, how a society should be. So they carried all these along with them, and they started enmeshing within that place. So he says, the Cassie talks about the vehicle of being in place is the body. The body goes out to meet the place world, as I said, and it bears the traces of the places it has known. Yes, when I went to London for my education, for me, after all spending 22 years of my life in South India, I expected a little South Indian food. I expected a little South Indian god, I expected a little community. So when I went to London, I was a little surprised, especially in the East London, where you find the Shanmukh temple, where I went to Birmingham, when I went to the Balaji temple. So I could find my place there. I could find my essence of place there. So who made this? The people who went before me, who went all the generations. They formed a community. They given certain meanings even in those places. And similarly, as I discussed with the colonial part, when they came to India, obviously they have carried out their what kind of traces. So you can still find your traces where you belong to, and that is what he calls, being in time. And Martin Heidegger's work in Being in Times, what he talks is, he basically talks about the density of engagement between self and place in this world. He calls this as a workshop. It is a kind of set of workshop because it is a field which you are getting, and your body, you are entering into that, and you are setting up your habitualities. And this is actually woven up with a rich fabric, the kind of habitual. Like, for instance, when I was in India, I was always, I have certain practices, but then when I went to England after living for 6-7 years, then it has given me certain practices. Certain practices were modified, certain practices were adjusted in order to accommodate the climate, in order to accommodate the local cultural needs and certain norms. Similarly, when I went to Sweden, even those practices have been adjusted further. So what we are, it is just a workshop, a place where we are. He considers that is a workshop, but then how we are enmeshed, a self is enmeshed within it, and with our habitualities. And he says that places are constructed in memories and affections through repeated encounters and complex associations. So this is what, because in this workshop, here what Heidegger talks is, it is a field, and people come here and people play and start defining it and started portraying. It's a big canvas cloth, and then you are going there and you are painting your impression, and then someone else is coming for you, and then there's the whole canvas cloth is coming with colors, as a big, it's not a static thing, it's changing every time. If the same color I have to keep 10 years before about my place, it will be very different what I see is today, right? So that is what he says, being in time. And it is also the ego of the mind, how it brings the egoistic into a form. Like now, the scale of a building, the monumental scales of the building, the forms of the building, the signs and symbols which are portrayed are basically carrying on your impression. And this is what he says, the workshop is simply an analogy of what Heidegger calls dwelling. So now, where we have reached, it is, we started with a discussion of place. We started understanding the tension between a space and place as a modernist and a postmodernistic tension. And that is where we are bringing the culture, and that is where we started talking about the sense of place. And when we are talking about the sense of place, we actually brought the place and identity. And here we are talking about how, in a much more deeper understanding, how the time can also bring certain understanding. The time can also bring different notions of a place. So that is what I end this lecture with, the saying of what is a dwelling. Dwelling is the capacity to achieve a spiritual unity between humans and the things. This is what Michael Harvey have talked about. And so in the next class, we discuss more about on these fields and habitats of Bourdieu and the dwelling aspects. Thank you very much. And this lecture is based on this following article, Hazel Estop, A Place Called Home. And I will sincerely suggest to all the participants to follow this particular article, which is available in the internet. Thank you.